You didn't hear this from just anyone. This is Mesmeric Femme, where we talk about feminine psychology, quiet confidence, and the kind of power you don't need to explain. Stay with me. I'll tell you what they don't. Today, we're breaking down something uncomfortable. Why being too available makes you forgettable, and why this has nothing to do with who you are. Look, this might hit a nerve, but if you've ever felt boring, forgettable, or easy to overlook, it's probably not because of your personality. It's because of how available you are. And that distinction matters more than people like to admit. By the end of this video, you'll understand why constant accessibility quietly erases mystery, and why reducing availability restores interest without changing your personality. Let's talk about something people don't say out loud. That quiet feeling of being easy to forget. You show up, you reply, you engage, you care, and still, attention drifts elsewhere. Not because you lack depth, not because you're uninteresting, but because your presence has become predictable, and predictability lowers perceived value. Mira, this isn't an insult, it's a pattern, and patterns can be changed. Here's the most important thing I want you to hear early. This is not an identity problem. You're not boring, you're not dull, you're not forgettable by nature. This is a behavioral issue, not a character flaw. And that's good news, because behavior is adjustable. In a few minutes, I'll explain why the brain equates constant availability with low urgency, and how that directly affects interest. Let's be honest. Being available feels like being warm, being open, being generous, being emotionally mature. You answer quickly. You always make time. You're responsive. Internally, that feels like integrity, but socially, it sends a different signal. The brain doesn't translate availability as kindness. It translates it as lack of competition. If something is always accessible, the mind assumes it doesn't need to prioritize it. Not consciously, automatically. Here's the thing, People don't value what's always there. They value what requires adjustment. Availability is information. It tells people how much you're waiting, how much you're oriented towards them, how much space you've cleared. And when that information is excessive, it removes tension. No tension means no curiosity. And without curiosity, engagement fades. Later, I'll explain why mystery isn't about being secretive, and why over-availability kills mystery faster than silence ever could. This is where people get confused. They think, if I'm present, they'll appreciate it. If I'm responsive, they'll value me. But appreciation doesn't create interest. Interest is created by contrast. When availability is constant, contrast disappears. And without contrast, nothing stands out. You've lived this. You reply fast, you follow up, you check in, and slowly, you're no longer chased, you're expected. Not because you did something wrong, but because your presence stopped being optional. Now wait, this matters. Being optional is not being disposable, it's being chosen. Perceived value isn't about effort, it's about scarcity of access. Luxury brands don't explain themselves, they don't chase customers, they don't respond instantly, they wait. And waiting increases desire. The same mechanism applies socially. In the next section, I'll break down exactly how over-availability shifts power dynamics, and why people unconsciously deprioritize what's always accessible. Over-availability feels safe. You don't have to wonder. You don't have to sit with uncertainty. You don't have to risk being misunderstood. But safety for you often means boredom for others. Because uncertainty is what keeps attention alive. When you're always available, you trade internal calm for external relevance. You soothe yourself by staying visible. But visibility without restraint doesn't create magnetism, it creates noise. And again, this doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means you were taught that availability equals worth, and that belief is quietly working against you. In Part 2, I'll explain how reducing availability restores mystery, and why mystery has nothing to do with playing games. So far, you understand why this isn't an identity flaw, how availability is interpreted psychologically, why being nice doesn't guarantee interest, and how predictability kills tension. But now we need to go deeper, because not all availability is ad. There's a specific type of over-availability that makes you forget you, and another type of presence that makes them lean in. That difference matters.
Here's the part most people miss. Availability doesn't just affect attraction, it affects power. The person who is always reachable slowly gives up control over timing. They respond quickly, they adjust easily, they make space on demand, and timing is power. When you give it away freely, the dynamic shifts, quietly, but permanently. Look, this isn't manipulation, it's perception, and perception is automatic. The human brain is a prioritization machine. It constantly asks, what needs my attention now? What can wait? What will still be there later? When you're always available, the brain categorizes you as later, not because you're unimportant, but because you've removed urgency. In a moment, I'll explain why people often confuse being taken for granted with lack of appreciation, when it's actually a scheduling problem in the brain. Interest thrives on micro-uncertainty. Not chaos, not confusion, just not knowing exactly when access will happen. Over-availability removes that. Your responses become expected. Your presence becomes assumed. Your energy becomes background noise. And background noise is ignored. Not disliked, ignored. You've felt this shift. At first, replies are fast. Curiosity is high. Questions flow. Then, slowly, responses shorten. Initiative drops. Engagement fades. Not because something went wrong, but because availability became guaranteed. Now wait, this matters. People don't lose interest because you show up. They lose interest because they no longer have to choose you. Access does not equal value. In fact, excessive access lowers perceived value. Think about it. Exclusive spaces limit entry. High-status people limit time. Meaningful connections require effort. Value rises when access requires adjustment. And socially, you are no different. Later, I'll explain why reducing availability doesn't make you distant and how it actually increases emotional investment from others. Here's the internal conflict. You think, if I pull back, I'm being fake. If I don't respond, I'm playing games. If I'm less available, I'm not being myself. But authenticity isn't constant access. Authenticity is aligned behavior, and alignment includes boundaries. Many people stay overavailable because they fear being seen as cold, uninterested, selfish. So they overcorrect. They give more time, more attention, more emotional access, and slowly they disappear. Overavailability leaks emotional information. It says, I'm waiting, I'm oriented towards you, you're a priority regardless of your behavior. And once that information is out, the other person adjusts. They don't rush. They don't invest equally. They don't feel tension, because tension has already been resolved. Interest needs space. Let's clarify something important. Mystery is not secrecy. It's not withholding. It's not being vague. Mystery is incomplete access. You're visible, but not fully reachable. That gap activates curiosity. In a moment, I'll explain the exact type of availability that increases value and why disappearing completely destroys it. People value what they invest in: time, effort, attention. If you remove the need for investment, value collapses. Over-availability removes friction, and friction is what creates investment. Think about connections that felt alive. There was waiting, wondering, anticipation, adjustment. Not anxiety, effort. That effort kept attention engaged. Ease is comfortable, but comfort doesn't excite the mind. The brain wakes up when it has to adapt, plan, prioritize. Over-availability removes all three, and interest fades. Not because you lack depth, but because there's nothing left to engage with. In the final section, I'll explain the fatal mistake people make when they try to reduce availability, and how doing it wrong makes them seem disinterested instead of valuable. So now you understand how availability affects power, why predictability kills interest, how mystery actually works, and why this isn't about playing games. But here's the danger. Most people reduce availability in the wrong way. They pull back emotionally, they disappear, they become cold, and that destroys connection completely. That's the mistake, and that's where we go next. Here's where most people sabotage themselves. They hear, be less available, and they disappear. They stop responding entirely. They withdraw emotionally. They become distant overnight. And suddenly, instead of being intriguing, they're confusing. Instead of valuable, they're irrelevant. That's not strategy, that's avoidance. Look, reducing availability isn't about vanishing, it's about changing the terms of access. There's a difference between false mystery and real mystery. False mystery looks like silence fueled by anxiety, delayed responses meant to provoke, emotional withholding with expectation. People feel that tension. It reads as, I want a reaction, I'm trying to control the outcome, and that kills trust. Real mystery is calmer. It's not reactive. It's not performative. It simply says, I have a full internal life and you don't have unlimited access to it. In a moment, I'll explain the internal shift that turns reduced availability into attraction instead of distance. Here's where everyone misses it. Availability isn't bad. Unconditional availability is. Availability increases value when it's responsive but not immediate, warm but not constant, present but not predictable. That balance creates rhythm, and rhythm keeps attention alive. Interest doesn't need constant contact, it needs variation. Presence, then space. Engagement, then pause. Connection, then autonomy. That rhythm allows the other person to notice your absence without feeling abandoned by it. Think about someone you missed once, not because they vanished, but because they had their own life. Their absence felt natural, not punitive. That's the difference. Here's the internal shift that changes everything. Reduced availability works only when it comes from self-priority, not strategy. You're not pulling back to be valued, you're pulling back because your time already has value, and people feel that distinction immediately. You don't create mystery, you protect it. When availability decreases from self-priority, your tone stays warm, your presence stays grounded, your responses feel intentional. There's no edge, no test, no silent demand, just alignment. Strategic availability looks like this. You don't rearrange your life instantly. You respond when it fits your rhythm. You engage fully when you do. You don't ration attention. You concentrate it. And concentrated presence feels rare. Earlier, we talked about feeling boring or forgettable. Here's the truth that resolves that shame. People didn't lose interest because you lacked depth. They lost interest because your presence required no adjustment. Once adjustment returns, interest follows. This isn't a game. Games require calculation. This requires honesty. Honesty about your energy, your capacity, your priorities. And honesty removes resentment. When you stop being over-available, conversations slow. Others initiate more. Interest becomes mutual, not magically, structurally, because dynamics adjust to boundaries. You don't need to act mysterious. You don't need to become distant. You don't need to withhold affection. You simply need to let some messages wait. Keep commitments to yourself. Stop filling every gap. Space does the work for you. You were never uninteresting. You were just too accessible, too easy to reach, too quick to respond, too ready to engage. And that wasn't kindness. It was self-erasure. Real value doesn't come from being everywhere. It comes from selectively present, warm, grounded, unavailable enough to be chosen. Because when access has limits, attention sharpens, and interest finally has room to breathe.